Since California Governor Gavin Newsom's minimum wage policy for fast food employees went into effect, many have highlighted the consequences, including rising fast food prices, the loss of thousands of jobs, and closing of chains like Rubio's Coastal Grill. For context, 2 months ago, California implemented a $20 an hour minimum wage for fast food employees, which is up from $16 an hour. The Wall Street Journal reported that since September, when California moved to require large fast food chains to bump up their minimum hourly pay to $20 in April, fast food and fast casual restaurants in California have increased prices by 10% overall, outpacing all other states.
Barry Ritholtz, columnist and founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, has done extensive research on the true impact of minimum wage policies and is here to help debunk some of what's been published about it. So, of course, Barry, the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal always have very good intentions when their reporters write about the economy. They just want people to be informed about what's going on. Of course, they don't always get it right. I'm being a bit cheeky here. I think that it's a little bit of intentional, the disinformation or misinformation that's out there about the impact of minimum wage policies, whether we want to say they're confusing correlation with causation. I don't know if that fully describes it. But the longitudinal data suggests this might be, seasonal fluctuations in employment. You also talk about this thing called denominator blindness. How many numbers are we talking here? Is 10,000 a lot? Would you get into some of those real reasons?
So let's look at two issues. The first is anytime the media gives you a big, scary number, it sounds like 10,000 people lost their job. Your first question has to be, 10,000 out of how many? If it's 10,000 out of 100,000, wow, that's a 10%, decrease. That's substantial. As it turns out, there are 1.5 million people that work in the fast food industry, or the quick serve is the technical term out there. The quick serve restaurant, QSR in California, 10,000 people out of 1.5 million is just noise in the measurement. That's less than 1%. Any data series at 1%, it's a meaningless number. You referenced seasonal adjustments. That's really the big difference. And it's kind of a shocking mistake to see come from an economics professor or the Wall Street Journal. The New York Post, I just assume whatever's in it outside of the sports pages is, partisan nonsense. But you expect better from the Wall Street Journal and from any trade group that hires an economist from a major college. It's kind of shocking. It's a Econ 101 sort of error.
I mean, it is the case, or it's at least rigorously debated. I know it's been debated for decades, and there's a lot of economic research to give economists and experts on both sides of the issue room to debate the subject, but there is research showing that in some circumstances, raising the minimum wage does lend itself to increased prices and increased unemployment. No?
So let's resolve that, because people say there's been a debate. Hey, people are debating whether or not the earth is flat, but that doesn't mean they're right. Seminal study from Alan Kruger 30 years ago found that moderate increases in minimum wage not only have a de minimis impact on employment, it actually is a net positive for the local region. Why is that? Because if you're going to pay people literally at the lowest end of the pay scale, the minimum wage, if you're going to pay them a little more, they go out and spend it locally. And so the net impact on that is slightly positive. That finding has been reproduced over decades, time and time again. There is no true debate about the fundamental premise. Moderate increases in minimum wage do not cause additional unemployment. Now, if you want to say going from 16 to 20 isn't moderate and it's too big of a leap at once, and maybe that might subsequently have a negative impact, that's a very different debate. But going from 10 to 12, going from 13 to 14 should have zero impact. But back to the data here, and this is what's so annoying, because I get emails from clients saying, hey, California is having all these layoffs in the restaurant industry. What's going on with the economy? And the answer is the data by the Bureau of Labor Statistics is reported in a way that, if you don't understand data series, is misleading. They report it. They report it in a. Anytime we look at something that has a seasonality to it, we want to know how much of the change is just seasonal and how much of it is something else. So this is the reason we don't freak out every January. Oh my God, millions of retail workers are being laid off. No, that's just the normal seasonal cycle after Christmas. And if we look at fast food restaurants in California, there's a seasonality that it more or less, after the summer, kids go back to college, part-time workers leave, full-time workers move on. That's the peak of that number. And then when you seasonally adjust, if you don't seasonally adjust it, it looks like you lose all these workers from September to March. But instead, if you look at it year over year, the legislation, minimum wage legislation, was passed in 2023 in September. How did September 2023 do versus September 2022? October 23 versus October 2022. In each instance, we see a slight increase. So when you adjust the numbers appropriately, when you take this seasonal rhythm into account, there were no job losses in California in the fast food world.
Barry, I really appreciate your perspective on this. I think about how reporting typically happens because people can't just go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and read the jobs report and fully understand it. They rely on reporters to do some of the explaining for them. And there's this belief that economics is a science and the numbers are the numbers. And if we're telling you workers are being laid off after this minimum wage policy was put into effect, that means that the policy caused it. And they don't really have to do much of proving their math on their conclusions. So I really appreciate your work debunking it, because it feels like intentional misinformation, because there are very many people that are stakeholders in some of America's largest fast food chains. There are people in corporate America that want it to be the case that the public believes minimum wage increases are somehow bad for the economy. I looked into McDonald's. They profit $37 billion year over year. They have 150,000 employees. They could afford to pay each of them annually an additional $200,000. It's not and they can't afford it situation with these wage increases. Certainly $4 on the hour is far less than $200,000 a year. So what would you tell people who want to get good information on this and want to understand this, the real impact of minimum wage increases are? Are they bad for the economy?
So again, just to repeat what I said earlier, moderate increases in minimum wage, and that's a squishy term, moderate. Is it $1? Is it $2? Is it $3? Typically has a local net positive benefit on the economy and no negative impact on employment. And if you stop and think about this, McDonald's is a big franchisor. Most of the local McDonald's around your town, wherever you happen to live, probably owned by a local business person. What you're really talking about is, what is the split of that revenue between the workers and the owners? And hey, there's supposed to be a debate about that. That's how capitalism works. So if we're talking about the minimum wage going up $1 or $2 in an area, and if you have 50 workers and they're each doing 40 hours a week, you can do the math. Over the course of a year, it's a few $100,000. And the reason it doesn't have a negative impact on employment is, if you're doing enough business to hire these people, you're going to hire them and pay them. If the business isn't there, you won't. And if you can replace them regardless of minimum wage with robots or automation, that long predates this minimum wage debate.
I mean, you described it as settled by the Kruger study, and you're the expert, not me, but it looks to me like there is like 10 or 20 studies since then. Mir and West, Newmark and Washer, Hoffman and Trace, a 29 study by the Georgia Institute of Technology, the U.S. Congressional Budget Office in 29, that did find harms in terms of the very things we're discussing. And obviously it has to do with the size of the minimum wage increase. If it's small, I mean, if the minimum wage increase is still under, a threshold where it's not even making a difference, then it's not going to matter. But
right.
it seems to me like there are, and it might be a benefit to the workers who stay on, but they might also have their hours reduced, or then you might, say, well, now you're going to do 2 jobs in this, you're going to be cleaning the grill and doing the cash register, and we're just going to have one person doing that, and you're getting paid more, but you're doing more work, and there's fewer people doing the job.
Well, there are lots of different variables that we could look at when it comes to theoretical possibilities. There was a book that Alan Kruger and his colleague, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, that more recently came out, obviously before Professor Kruger passed away, that looked at thousands of studies that have come out over the past, since their initial research 30 years ago, and overwhelmingly the net impact is de minimis, with no increase in unemployment. You certainly can identify specific outliers where there was an increase. Very often there are many other factors. We love, as a species, we love black and white, yes or no, up or down answers. No one really loves a nuanced, subtle shade of gray kind of answer. And this, for the most part, if it's a moderate increase in minimum wage, that's pretty well settled. There's no negative impact, and there are some positive impacts on the local economy. Where things start to get a little gray is what's a moderate impact? Is 10% moderate? Is 25% moderate? Obviously you double the minimum wage, and it's going to cause big problems for a local restaurant in any state. So yeah, there's definitely shades of gray there. To me, the big issue is you have to manage the data correctly. As an investor, and I'm constantly dealing with this with clients who will see something that is sort of aberrant, and I'll get an email, hey, I know you've been constructive on the stock market the past 2 years, but look, the restaurant industry is collapsing. And they'll show me this viral video on YouTube about 500 restaurants closing. Well, it's 500 restaurants out of how many? It's 750,000 restaurants in the country. Is 500 a lot? What's the average each year? You really have to be a more thoughtful consumer of media. You have to realize everyone is selling you something, whether they want your attention or your vote or your dollars. Everybody has something for sale. And when you don't bring just a little bit of skepticism, it's very easy to be fooled. One of my favorite economists was this woman, Joan Robinson, in the UK, the rare female economist in the 40s, 50s, and 60s over there. And she used to say, we study economics not to know more about the economy, but so as to not be fooled by economists. And this specific instance with minimum wage in California not being seasonally adjusted is a perfect example of, hey, let's not get fooled by the economist. Analyze the numbers, seasonally adjusting them, and you'll realize that so far, and I have no idea, maybe the $20 minimum wage will cause a problem down the road. Maybe it won't. But so far, the evidence is it has had no negative impact. That 10,000 number that keeps getting shared is just wrong. It's something that is non-seasonally adjusted. Look at each month on a year-over-year basis, or just look at the seasonally adjusted data, and you realize, oh, there hasn't been any major layoffs in California fast food.
Barry, really appreciate your work. Thank you for helping us not get fooled by economists. More rising after this.
Thank you so much.